Again in studio, this time about theory, but also philosophy and psychiatry. Understand different forms of origins is very important also in American society, but also in Europe to understand different forms of dimensions, but also some forms of self-defense are actually to improving the theory. Of course, millions of people around you are some sort of environment that is extremely abstraction. The beauty is not easy, but usually the beauty is not most important. To understand different forms of simple visible society is also important to build better design. For people that are purchasing different forms of architects, it's very important to build more corporate structure, but also self-help. To understand traditions together with the Feng Shui, it's also important. But without Feng Shui, it's very difficult to find property that is going to bring you some fortune, or you are going to build house on it. Of course, that's the dimension of 4 square, which is extremely difficult and in book described as empty. Of course, you should not think that you are the same like your surroundings, because probably there is millions of psychology why you are not what is around you. Around you there is millions of illusions, but also millions of buildings that you could not afford. But probably with the right prosperity, you could actually purchase anything. Too much time, people think only about the silver, gold, or fortune in the terms of money. But in fact, the Feng Shi is like millions of simple forms of gold, but also more traditional way, and the way in history people actually think about different forms of property. To understand different forms of principles is also important, but also simple Bhagavad forms together with eight conspiracy. Conspiracy are usually actually from politics, but it's very important to understand United States of America. Simple methods also if you want to understand the land in general forms. It's very difficult to understand higher degree if you are in religion, because those are extremely toxic sometimes. To understand six simple secrets is very important when you come to Feng Shi dragons. Probably, and usually it's also very good to understand the compass. So you are going to allocate your properly with your compass also. For experts in health, if you own any property, probably it's the best to build some sort of simple house together with the clinic. Of course, you can help millions of people all over the America, but also in Europe. Depends where you are located. Of course, millions of maps on the planet are fiction. The people that are thinking that lands are not fiction are extreme fiction. So, from the terms of politics, anything in politics is 100% fiction. It is very important to understand simple forms of astrology, but also millions of fictions when it comes to book or astrology. To understand simple Chi Man is also very important if you are going to decide for a better girlfriend. 90% of men in this world cannot control their girlfriend because they lack chi man. But it's actually very important to build prosperity also together with your partner, but also as a human for yourself. To understand this movie, it's not easy. All the humans in this world are some sort of army and they battle for the better health. It's not easy to understand 8 triagrams, but also different forms of solar terms together with 5 elements. Of course, in book, those 5 elements become millions of different elements, but each element is worth only $1 and not like you see in very famous store where every product costs more than $1. and extremely fiction in price if celebrity. To understand applications is also not easy, but also to understand more and more simple chi man. If you are going to ask me anything about chi, me do not know about that, and it's very important also to play configurations together with different forms of gates, but also simple forms of the book miracle together with different forms of classical forms of land texts. To understand Feng Shui, it's not easy, but it's also very important if you have a partner not to expect too much from it, but also they should actually pay 50% for the flat or home house you are going to purchase with them. If your partner cannot pay 50%, of course, that's not a small problem. With book, my book, the divinations are actually possible, but it's very hard to predict the future. So, on the simple terms of life, it's probably the best to understand simple forms of the Feng Shui meanings. Very dangerous forms also appears when women look for more and more Feng Shui and not the proper partner. Usually, women should actually see the Feng Shui in their partner. And of course, here it come the 900,000 animals, also of the philosophy. What do you think about different forms of elements, but also what do you think about women? Not easy to understand different forms of the tongue together with Dunjia, but also to understand different forms together with complicated book that me made. Mastering the Feng Shui is actually not easy, but also to understand the astrology of English is extremely complex. Me also made 1 million book, but all sold out. It's not easy to understand simple form of the process together with simple here, but also not to be too complex together with any political numbers, because those are usually extremely difficult. To understand different forms of commentary together with my statements is also not easy. Psychology, of course, is some sort of cartomancy, but also different forms of divination methods for astrology together with pregnancy for women. To understand different forms together with cartomancy is not easy. There is standard deck of 52 cards, but also some face cards you can actually purchase together with my profile. To understand different forms of medium in commercial use, but also different forms of interpretations around the world. And if world is Africa, we are both in trouble without proper cards. To understand different nations, it's not easy, but the positions become quite complicated when it comes to different forms of banking. When people are looking for more in life, it's very important to understand simple form of the history together with Feng Shui, but also to understand different forms of displays together with the code. There are millions of European desks for the cards together with the face, but also American desks together with the face. And those also show different forms of the queens, kings, and ranks. To understand Feng Shui is very important because it's actually playing different forms together with the queens and kings. People that are more religious, probably it's very difficult to decide what Feng Shui means for them. It looks like Satan, or even worse. Sometimes it's very important to be silent in life and build the movie together with framework. And of course, if you watch this movie, you can also think about to donate to my clinic for around 1,000 euro or dollars. It also depends on the status, the number you are actually able to donate on my bank account. To understand different forms of the language together with work, it's not easy, but also to understand fluent forms together with the T, The simple T since 19th century is very important together with the economists, but also to understand simple forms of the Feng Shui together with modern economy it's not easy. There are millions of hubs, but also critical people that are sending me different forms of letters together what they dislike in my book or some do not understand it. And of course, the movie apply for them. Not easy to understand different forms of cartoons that are internet making sometimes, but also different forms of journalism. In the Middle East, there are many tropical variants on Feng Shui, but also different forms of technology futures together with the Feng Shui to forum, but also to buy cheaper land. The cheaper is not always better, but also to understand different forms of liberalism when it comes to different forms of organization. There are many letters that people can actually get from the face, but also the science is improving from time to time. There is some sort of game related to all those millions of the maps, together with the theory of all lands in world. But if world is Africa, I'm afraid that all land is very, very cheap. When it's becoming expensive, you can see that people are becoming over emotional over land or even over political. We have the policy not to play in land with the politics, but to play with rich. To understand self policy sometimes is very important, and you can actually move your own feng shui on another level. To understand different horrors of the internet is also very important if you are looking for different forms of lifestyle, but also to explain different forms of feng shui it's not easy. The Royal Society, it's not only in main cities around the world, of course it's everywhere. To understand different forms of infographics, it's not easy if you are going to live in London. And if you look for London on general, you are going to see there is so much users, but it's very hard to surf without brands and patents. So for people that are looking for a better and better political news or info, they are not going to find anything about better health or better feng shui. From that point of view, the technology is actually much more important than we think, but also simple forms of the seminars and events but also the movies that we see in every day. Of course, there is also the theory of the sun and moon, together with the theory of the partners. How those work together is actually extremely difficult, but also to understand different forms of the dimensions together with Feng Shui, it's not easy. There are different forms of the dots, together with different forms of the curved lines, but it's not easy to understand different forms of the function when you connect that to Feng Shui. The Feng Shui is actually concept, but it becomes very, very difficult if you have slightly a lot more gold, silver, or function together with the money mathematics. To understand different forms of consultants, they actually become zero because they are over political. The movie that appears in Feng Shui are extremely interesting because 90% of those are not working. Of course, if you cannot purchase any property and you are working a lot, you should actually build self terms for the money. You are not going to work if you could not buy any property. To understand that type of self term is very important, and of course, you are going to decide how much code you should actually apply to different properties together with different forms of the functions